go. Season 1 featured multiple characters and had multiple plot lines. And you had Tom, you had Jaden, and then you also had Nathan. And then every single primary character had their own plot lines. And this year it seems to be converging a little bit. Are we going to see more characters added to Division and also see Maggie go off on her own mission again and Michael's own mission, Alex, and have a little bit more?
Well, we've introduced a few new characters already. We've introduced Sean, and also Madeline, Senator Madeline, has also kind of entered as a regular character as well, semi-regular character, and so the other members of Oversight. So we have brought in these people. They are slightly separate in terms of their storyline right now, but the idea is to kind of have them all converge at some point. We want to give the feeling that all these storylines, even when they're sort of very distinctly parallel, eventually they will all come together.
Okay.
So, for example, in next week's episode, you'll see probably the most distinct storylines you'll have for the Alex storyline and the Nikita storyline, but even then, I hope you'll get the feeling that they're kind of on converging tracks, and that'll gain steam until about the mid-season break, and that's when you'll really feel like everyone is kind of on the same road. What was the other part? I'm sorry, what was the other part?
Okay, and the second part was, I do feel that Alex and Michael and Nikita's mission are all converging, well, partly because half of the cast is living in the same house, but I'm wondering if we're going to see them go back onto these separate streams.
Well, as their relationships kind of ebb and flow, that'll dictate whether or not they're together or apart. So, like Nikita and Michael, there's going to be a sort of a natural separation for the two of them within an episode or two, and that'll dictate them having separate storylines.
Okay. Not a romantic separation.
Well, they'll hit some bumps in the road. It's not as simple as kind of a fight, a romantic that separates them. They still love each other, they still want to be together, but circumstances will kind of come between them. That's kind of what Maggie was referring to before as sort of the adult problems that come up. It's important to us that it wasn't something that's, whatever came between them shouldn't be anything that's too annoying. You know, it shouldn't be like all of a sudden there's a third person. You know, it's not like that. It's something that's more organic to their story.
A work situation where they don't see eye to eye on, perhaps, where it's going to divide them?
Comes in through their work, but then again, their work is sort of like killing people. So it's a little bit different than an office romance or annoying office colleague. But it's something from their past, something from that sort of comes in between them. And you'll see that it's not a sudden moment. It's not like, oh my God, I can't be with you. Oh my God, I gotta get away from you. It's just something they're like, well, we kind of need to deal with this. And that's like what we meant by adult problem. So neither of them will be acting petty or childish. Hopefully not. Hopefully it won't come up as that.
I like the way that you're using Xander Berkeley and like that Silence of the Lambs like cell, and the scenes between him and Melinda Clark's character, kind of playing tennis with each other, and how she's trying to get information and how he's trying to get something out of her, and even with Alex.
Right.
I think that's a really neat twist to the show. That's.
I have to say that was those are some of the most fun scenes to write and come up with ideas for, because it's weird in a weird way. Keeping him confined and enclosed makes him almost a little more dangerous. There's something about, he's plotting something, he's thinking of something, and he makes these very small moves, very small chess moves that are going to pay off down the line. But for the moment, they just sort of scare you. And again, it's like having a tiger caged in the zoo. In the way that he sort of paces in there, and the way he knows the space, it makes him all that much bigger in a way. And it's great to see how it develops. And Xander and Melinda have really sort of taken the ball and run with it. They love being in that set. They spend the bulk of their scenes just with each other, and it's fun to see how they take all that. And every time I go up there to Toronto, they've sort of come up with their own sort of backstory as to what's going on in between episodes and stuff, and it gets more and more elaborate every time. It's usually kind of kinky, and it's a lot of fun to listen to. But they're having such a great time with it. That's honestly one of the reasons. Like, we don't feel a need to bust Percy out of there anytime soon, because he's doing so well in there. and we're having so much fun watching him in there that we might as well milk that.
Oh, yeah.
Basically, Burkhoff has always been kind of one of my favorite people, but this season he really is one of my favorite people. Like, I'm just between laughing every week at what he does and just really enjoying his interactions with, Michael and Nikita. Did you kind of plan that at the end? I mean, last season, like, did you know he was going in that direction, or was it just, you started writing the season and you realized you kind of wanted to put him in a more focal point now that, things were where they were in the story, and Michael and Nikita and Alex and everyone was kind of on their own?
No, it was pretty apparent from last season that he was a pretty special character, and that Aaron was doing some really special things with him. So we knew we had to take advantage of that, both as storytellers and as producers. So we had an idea that we wanted him to be an important part of this season. How his role has evolved has been a little bit more organic. It's not something we stepped out every step of the way. We knew once we had established his character as being sort of the rogue hacker millionaire that's out there, and initially it was just sort of a fun idea, but it's turned into all these different story possibilities of what he can do. He provides them with different bases and different equipment, and he can do different things. He still has all of his powers as the hacker. And with Burkhoff, the most interesting thing is always kind of the way he handles his interpersonal relations, whether they're with a team like Nikita and Michael, or with Alicia, like you saw in the second episode, or even the way he interacts with Sonia, who's his replacement at Division. And within the sort of virtual interactions he has with them, an entirely new relationship sort of springs up. And that's sort of really gratifying to see, that he can do all of that from within the confines of his own set, because he doesn't get out a lot, and yet he still somehow seems like the most present of all of those characters. He's kind of everywhere. You kind of know that Burkhoff is always around. In next week's episode, he's again sort of in his usual role where he's at base and he's hacking things and on comms with them, but you always get the sense that he's sort of around, even when you don't want him to be. So he's a great character in that regard.
Is the box that he has in his computer that essentially gets triggered by whatever is happening out there, is that going to play a prominent role for the rest of the season? Yeah,
that's a really important object for us. It's Percy's master box. It's the one they stole at the end of last season. It's where they're deriving all of their information this season, which is kind of key to all of their missions, and as well as their ongoing mission. So it's a very, very important tool for them. And it's also kind of what provides the motivation for Amanda and Division and Oversight to be hunting them. So it's a cross between one of the Harry Potter Horcruxes and sort of the Lost Ark of the Covenant. It's a really important thing that sort of figures in all of our stories.
Actually, that's what I love about the writing. It's just, you always bring in these references to pop culture. It's always through Burkhoff, where there's the Horcrux, or referring to Percy as Voldemort. And there are just these little references back and forth between the characters. I just love that language.
Yeah, I mean, we're all pop culture consumers in the writers' room, so we're all aware of that as well. And he's just sort of the perfect, character to voice a lot of that stuff. So that's another added advantage of having him around. It's like I said, he's a terrific character to write for.
I think one of the things that's very realistic about the show is between Nikita and Michael, they show that they care for each other in like little glances or looks. Is that in the script, or is that something that the actors have kind of brought into it?
It's a little of both. It's one of those things, again, like last season, we saw what was coming back to us in film, and we knew we had something special with the way that Maggie and Shane were playing it. So that kind of informs your writing when you go forward. You know that you can get things across, whether it's emotional backstory or just to carry a moment without having to overwrite the dialogue. So a lot of times especially for me, I'll write a scene knowing I'm trying to get something across emotionally. And then after I write it, I'll go back and I'll just pare it back. And you find that sometimes you just have to put in maybe a little bit of stage direction and let the actors carry the weight of it. It's funny, we'll have these notes calls with the network, and they'll ask about that. They'll go, are we going to get this across? What we're trying to get across here? And usually my response is like, I'm positive that Shane and Maggie will be able to deliver that. You know? And they're like, oh, of course, sure. It's one of those things that you just get to know, and then and it's a back and forth. It's like you see it, so you write to it. They take that, they run with it, they develop a little more. Because with some actors, it can just be, you can say in the script a sense of longing or loneliness or whatever, and they'll get that across. But then as you watch them, you realize you can get a lot more. So you start writing to that, which is great.
And improv-wise, how much of a rein is on them to be able to improv a little different this way?
In terms of the story, we try to keep it under control because our stories are so intricate and complex that you don't want to have them stray and say something, even if it's so innocuous that you don't think it's going to mean anything, but then down the line it could mean something. But in terms of the character stuff, we're always encouraging actors to do that, and we take notes from all of them. And some of our best stuff is improv. In that sizzle reel we just saw, the end of it, the closing line where Xander just is fully dressed in his cube and he goes, "It's a start." He improv that line. I read that scene where he just sort of stands there and you get this visual of Percy in his suit, sort of at full power. And on the last take, he added that in there, and it's great. That's what we were using, and that's sort of closed out that reel. So there's a lot of that goes on, which is great.
The one thing I loved about last season was that you had a lot of gritty and disturbing scenes. I mean, where we see the multiple assaults of Alex, and we see multiple torture scenes of Michael and Nikita, and I thought, wow, I can't believe they're getting this across in the CW. But again, at the same time, I thought it was excellent. And then you're also experimenting, you're doing kind of, oh my gosh, an Inception almost in, I'm just totally forgetting that movie, but something of the, never mind. But you're doing Inception, but you're experimenting a lot. Are you going to continue with that and just keep going on these crazy tangents?
Yeah, we do tend to go a little darker than the other CW shows, although I have to say Supernatural is fairly dark a lot of times as well. Which is why it's such a good pairing for us. We tend to explore that world a little more, and we'll definitely. We've already done shows that are in that same vein. I think. I'm trying to. Sorry, I apologize. I'm trying to remember what episodes have aired now. So last night's was 204. That's the one where Alex goes on the Kachenko mission.
I think it's
it was the one. No, it was the one before that, right? In 203, when she goes on the Kachenko mission. And that one, I love the ending of it. I mean, it just ends. She's not supposed to take the shot. She's not supposed to take the shot. And you've seen built up throughout the episode all of the motivation why she should kill this guy. And then it just ends with her, pulling the trigger and taking out that guy. And it's one of those moments that it's pretty dark, but it fits in very organically with the character and will help us with our story going forward. So we're definitely going to go in that direction and keep taking those chances and doing those kinds of things. In terms of the Inception storyline, I think you're talking about, for example, the episode we did last year where Alex had her dream sequences and stuff like that. That was probably our most, I guess, experimental in terms of storytelling episode. We don't have anything on the books that's sort of that far out, but we definitely are playing with flashbacks, and we're definitely sort of, like I said, interweaving storylines. It makes the season actually a little more difficult than the first season because we've got to keep all these parallel storylines running and yet figure out a way to make them feel like they're going to converge. So that in itself is tricky as a storyteller, from a storytelling standpoint.
That's great.
Thanks.
I do like the story.